Now we're going to get into like your first year. Okay, so you've made the decision, you've worked through the process. Now you're in your first year in the role. And so that's what we're going to unpack in this session. So I'm super excited. You know, from the outside, it can look very different than the real experience, right? I mean, I think when I shifted into my first year, I quickly realized there were things I were completely unaware of and unprepared for. You get insight into so much more when you start the role. So we're going to hear from Peter, Ryan, and Michael today, exploring your first year, transition stories, skill sets required, unforeseen challenges. So Peter, I'll start with you. I'm just going to pass it over. Tell me a little bit about your company, your name, your role, and then we'll go through the others. Maybe Michael, then Peter, and then we'll jump right in.
Love it. Chris, are we still doing like fun facts or outside of work too?
You totally can, man.
Perfect. All right. Well, I'm Peter. Nice to meet or see everybody here. I work for a small digital health company called Memora, and I've been in the pre-sales profession for the last 5 or so years. Let's see, outside of work, I'm a big Colorado guy, so I do a lot of the skiing, hiking, mountain biking, and then on the creative side, I've been getting into improv, which has been fun both personally and professionally. In terms of the transition, I found myself really, really excited about all of the different projects that align to driving team efficiency. And so when the opportunity came to join a much smaller team, it felt super natural to really double down on those types of projects and be able to build from a smaller perspective.
Awesome. Over to you, Michael.
All right. Hi, everyone. Michael Amaturo. I'm the head of solutions engineering at experience.com, which is a 7-year-old company, but it's still in startup mode in many ways. We've got about 200 employees, and as a solutions engineer, player coach, doing both roles. It's a team of me and 2 other people below me, and we support 6 AEs, plus the partner team, plus the success team, the customer success team. So we're very much gearing up for growth on our side. And yeah, I've been in this role for obviously a year, but I've been doing solutions engineering, sales engineering for about 8 years. And I've been selling enterprise software, started as an SDR and in sales operations 15 years ago.
Cool. Thank you, Michael. One fun fact about Michael is...
Fun facts. Well, I would be remiss not to mention my work outside of work, which is helping people get remote tech jobs and enter the remote tech world. So especially living in rural America, I live in upstate New York, and there's a lot of people who are looking to get into remote tech jobs. So I'm actually coaching and helping them do that under a program called bendicoot.com.
Nice. I appreciate the plug. Michael and I met at a pre-sales collective event where he actually hired on the spot a solutions engineer who had joined pre-sales collective. We're going to unpack that whole story potentially in a podcast, but it was just a very inspiring pre-sales collective story. So yeah, I'd love to have you on the session. Over to you, Ryan.
Yeah, nice to meet everyone. My name is Ryan Nabuta. I'm a manager for our sales engineers at GearSet, which is a DevOps tool for Salesforce. I've been a sales engineer for about 5 years, 3 here and 2 at a competitor, which is a great way to gain experience. If you want to jump to a competitor, always can fast track your career. Yeah, I'm more a purely manager. I was a player coach about a year before doing this. I find the player coach is probably tougher than being just a pure coach to straddle both sides. I've found it to be very difficult. But my kind of fun fact of what I like to do outside of work is I love spending time with my family, like gravel cycling, but I have been working for about 2 years on trying to launch a board game on a Kickstarter. And so I've been doing a lot of printing and cutting and gluing and taking to game testing and being told it's not going to work and then having to go back to the drawing board and fix some things. So I recommend it to anybody that you want to spend years on a hobby and not really get too far with it. So that's my fun facts.
That sounds super tedious, but I mean, I'm interested now. I want you to send me the link to this thing that you're working on. Yeah, we do love board games over here at PreSales Collective. Like I said in the intro, Liz does board game nights. That's awesome. Yeah, thanks for sharing, Ryan. I'll just jump it in to the first question. This is kind of like, we've covered a lot today, but I want to just unpack really what's the most surprising aspect of the shift to you now that you've been in the role for a while. What is one thing that was more surprising than others in the seat? So we can start with you, Ryan, and we just take it around.
Yeah, I was surprised by a couple things. So on the positive side, I would say when you gain the job title of manager, you do have a little bit more sway in an organization and getting product to add some things to the roadmap, even if it's putting it ahead of something else they were long working on. That was really hard to do as an SE, even a senior sales engineer. But when you have manager in your title, it does influence those decisions a little easier. So you need to be careful about what you're using those for, but you do have a little bit more power at your fingertips of if that's what it's going to take to win a deal that you can push when you need to. Maybe on the negative side, the stress level is much different. Like being an individual contributor, you're focused on your calendar, you're keeping up to date on product knowledge, but we're put in the jobs that we're in to make everybody better. And if we're not making everybody better, then we're not adding value to the organization. So I would say for those of you that want to go to leadership because maybe you're feeling the demo burnout and running POCs is tough, it's just a whole new level of stress of caring about other people's success more than just your own.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point about having, for me, it was surprising to have a different critical eye to the documentation that I had been creating for the year before I became a manager. So I knew I made it clear to the organization that I wanted to manage a team of SEs when I first came on board. So everyone was geared toward that. And I created a lot of documentation around the process and around how I actually did the job as an SE. But then when I actually had one guy in India, and now we have Pat in New York, you see the materials that you created with a more critical eye and actually get feedback from them, obviously, to say where you actually need to polish it or where you actually need to give more detail than you originally thought. So just viewing the content that I've created from their viewpoint was a little surprising to say, all right, I've got to look at it a little bit differently than as if somebody else is viewing it.
And I would say just the broadening of the hats that you wear. As an SC, we're super familiar with juggling all the different hats in terms of the roles that you play in a deal. But as a manager, you really have to think about and prepare for, the role that you're going to be playing in the slew of internal meetings that'll surely block up your calendar. Ryan, I definitely hear your point too on like the heightened stress. Big deals can be super stressful, but when you own the performance of the entire team, the stakes are just that much higher. So it's definitely sort of a pro con, but super exciting challenge.
Yeah, good points, everyone. I agree with all of them. It's like, I remember building out a playbook at an organization when I was an IC and I made a transition to management. And I remember looking at that playbook thinking, this is really cool for an IC role, but it doesn't give my manager what she needed to actually like grow the team. Like there was parts that were just very just not abstract enough, very much like tactical stuff that just didn't really move the business forward. And it wasn't until I got into management and realized, oh, that all those things didn't matter actually, So the next question is more so on skill set evolution. So in pre-sales, we have unique backgrounds. A lot of us come from all kinds of areas. But what skills specifically from pre-sales proved most valuable in your management role? And which new skills did you find essential to develop once you got there?
Well, I'll say that one of the skills that was advantageous was already having, after being an SE for at that point 7 years and interacting with so many different people in the organization. I think the unique ability for pre-sales to interact with product and engineering and executives and sales, that was definitely advantageous because more people are leaning on your expertise as a leader, as a manager, and they're leaning on your leadership. So just being able to negotiate all those different relationships, I think is something that was really important to me and continues to be.
Awesome. Ryan, how about you?
Yeah, great answer, Michael. I look at it like when I was kind of wrapping up my time as an individual contributor, we were really starting to land a lot of enterprise deals, and I was very much a part of that. And if you're helping close enterprise at your company, you are setting the foundation and the path that company wants to go. And what I found was, to win those deals, I had to follow the typical playbook, but also be very bold and different and take what we like to call, kind of educated gambles. Like you're going to have to do some things because all your competition wants those things. And then I found when I got into leadership, like you just have those educated gambles that you're making on other things. Like the data can point you one way or another, which, the more you get in the data, the more you almost can trust it less when you find out more of how these things are constructed. But, for me, it was taking that same level of boldness and gambling, if you will, that I did on the enterprise that paid off, and then doing that for other initiatives that we want to do at GearSet, of what to do with people, what to do to focus on those, the strategy for more of those enterprise things. So it's kind of like, you go in the minor leagues and you hit some home runs, and now you're in the big leagues, and they want to see you have the same level of a batting average, and having that, taking that level of confidence that you had in an IC on those things, and then bring it to the same initiatives you're going to have as a manager. So that helped me out a lot, is landing those two before I moved on to the role.
I think educated gambles is going to be my new mantra, Ryan. I love that. Over to you, Peter.
Yeah, I like that. And I think, one of the biggest skills that I had to learn in terms of driving the team was trying to understand like what role we're playing when we're engaging in a process. It can be really easy with solutions getting pulled in 16 directions to ultimately have that sacrifice from like our core direction of driving revenue, and trying to tease apart, like, using the RACI model, like which things are we truly responsible for, which things are we more valuable as just a consultant party, and trying to make those directions clear within the team and within the broader org has been something that we've spent a lot of time iterating on, and has ultimately helped us be the most effective sort of piece within the broader machine.
You also asked about, and I'm glad you brought that up, Peter, because what it sparked my thinking is the area that I'm working on and still looking to improve is just making that shift from really articulating my strategic vision and building a strategic vision for how solutions engineering contributes to the company. I think the ability to both write the strategy and do that in conjunction with so many, there's a lot of guidance from PSC, there's a lot of mentorship from other people, but actually taking a stand on what you want the organization to do, and then articulating that to the other leaders in the organization so that they can get on board with it, is something that I'm still working on. I think it's that visionary communication pipeline is something that I think is valuable.
Yeah, and it's hard to keep it when somebody throws you a curveball and tries to say, no, that's not going to work. And you're like, it's tougher, especially depending on the size of your organization. But at some point you have to make a decision. And that's actually one of the hardest things in my first year as a manager. I realized it's like, this could be a 50-50 turnout, but making a decision is more important than not. And at the end of the day, you just have to trust it. Yeah, it's tough. All right. Now I'm going to get into some of the first months. So like the first year as a manager, I feel like you learn probably as much as you would learn is in 3 years in a different role. And the first few months are key. So what are some of the biggest challenges you encountered during those first few months, and how did you overcome them?
Well, so you understand that experience.com is a fully remote organization. So we emerged out of COVID and just doubled down on it and said we're going to be fully remote. But what that meant was making sure that managing someone in India who, for the most part, is on East Coast hours. I mean, he'll go till about 2:30 Eastern for the benefit of keeping the hours pretty close. Managing the remote organization, I think it was the big initial challenge, because it's at least for remote, I learned a lot from GitLab. I learned a lot from doing remote work myself as an individual, but actually to manage remotely, like having conversations daily to make sure that someone's accountable for the work that they're doing, and making sure that there's enough communicative feedback going back to, in my first months, I only had one person working for me. So making sure that that he was getting the point and that we were really having that open communication that was the first struggle for me that we overcame, because we really had to, as a remote org.
And I'll pose that question to everybody listening. Like, who here, maybe you should just throw something in the chat, like the word remote, but who is fully remote in the audience? I mean, switching over to management in a remote based company has its own challenges. You can't just go up to somebody and go up to their desk and have that conversation and build that relationship. You have to find ways to do it. It looks like a lot. Wow.
A lot, yeah.
The whole SE team is remote, fully remote, 80% remote. We're seeing a lot of that too. And yeah, wow. And this really confirms a lot of SEs can be remote, and a lot of teams have partial remote, fully remote. Becoming a manager, I think I was a manager of a new team during COVID, which was our first. Oh, hey Pat, I see you in there too. Which is like we were remote. You could always be remote if you wanted to, but taking over a new team remotely where we couldn't meet was challenging, and Zoom fatigue is a thing. And that's a good point. I love all the interaction. Thank you. Okay, over to you, Peter. Same thing. We're talking about the challenges within the first few months.
Yeah, first few months, I was thinking about this one. One of the biggest things is, I feel like for a lot of small companies, as the SC, like you're really stepping in where previously it was like the founder or like the CEO or the CTO. And that can be really interesting in terms of, it's their baby. They certainly know the most about the product, and they're used to being the guy who's answering the questions, giving the pitch meetings, knowing that. And it can be interesting to sort of like take that away from them in small teaspoons and help demonstrate that, hey, actually, like by building in some of these best practices around demo craft, around the function generally, like we can actually drive much, much greater outcomes. But ultimately, you're taking away like a really big thing from one of the biggest people in the company, and navigating that to best maximize can be really interesting.
Yeah, good points. Over to you, Ryan. First couple months.
Yeah. Obviously your first couple months, you have just a lot of things you're ready to kind of hit the ground running with, and you don't want to have too much overnight changes, but you're getting to know your people, getting to know their career goals. I found that to be pretty easy, of just learning what they care about, always asking these things every month of like, are we still aligned with what your brand is that you want to have here, what you want to accomplish? I would say the toughest part was, and for all of you thinking of becoming a leader, is to be very blunt, is there's just going to be times where you have to get some blood on your hands, like AEs that aren't a fit, people that aren't pulling their weight, where we know as the SE, we're kind of like the mule that just gets more weight thrown on our back and expected to pick up the slack a lot of times. But AEs get paid more than us. The saying is AEs eat better, but we sleep better. Well, they have to pull their weight. So my first 6 months, I had a lot of calls with other sales managers, with what I was observing on these higher end deals and people not pulling their weight. And we sent a good amount of people packing, and it was very much largely because of my feedback. And, it's not fun to push someone out in an organization, but I do buy into the Netflix belief of, we're not a family, we're a team. And if, I'm out there and I'm missing layups left and right, I'm going to go to the bench. And so it's the same thing as an organization, that if you have people not pulling their weight, making, I had SEs come to me after a call and was like, such and such just did this, and they were mad. And I knew like if I didn't do anything about it, like I could lose that person, or we just allow for weaker people to stay on. So that was the toughest part. Was most people don't like affecting other people's careers, especially when they're on another team. But that bought me immense amount of points with the team, that like they felt great knowing we're not going to tolerate that kind of thing. And that when they tell me those things, I don't just wait till the next meeting that I have to bring this up. Like, no, this is something we're going to address immediately. So that would be one thing that if you want to be a leader, you're going to have to be a little content with. You are going to not only affect your team's careers, but all the other parts of the organization that you're touching, unless you don't want your team to have any respect and just be the mule where more weight is thrown on our back all the time.
There's so many truth bombs in that, Ryan. AEs eat better, SEs sleep better. You know, there's so much good stuff to unpack there. I mean, I think you're right. It's like, you know, don't jump in the water if you don't know how to swim, right? And when you jump in, you've got to be prepared for that. I love it. Over to you, Michael.
It's worth I think it's worth reiterating what Ryan said about taking a stand on what's going on in the organization, because yeah, in my first year, and even in my first year at the company, yeah, we were going through a lot of evolution and a lot of turmoil in our sales organization. So that was a kind of a practice run to actually take a stand and say which AEs are performing, which AEs are not, and what parts of the organization need improvement. I think it's worth saying, it's a common adage, but I think it's worth saying that you should, when you do have those critiques, you should come with some sort of solution to it, or some way to resolve what's going on, so that you come across as someone who's not just bringing problems, but you're bringing solutions. And I think that when you do that, especially in the early days, it builds up where people come to you for solutions, and even people who are in other departments start leaning on you for that sort of thing. So taking a stand is important, I think, especially for the health of the organization overall.
Yeah, man, it changing your mindset of the health of the organization, not just you, not just your team. Yeah. Next question, balancing act. How do you balance the strategic aspects of management, the hands-on technical knowledge required in our role? And every organization has a different level. Some managers are required to be extremely technical, some aren't. So I'll open this up to all of you. Peter, go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, I really like this question, because I think one of the biggest things that people don't tell you, or you don't maybe anticipate about becoming a new manager, is all of the internal meetings. I mean, oh my goodness. I used to really scratch my head when I would look at my leaders' calendars that looked like an absolute bookshelf, and man, I'm right there with them. It can be tough to just keep up with the demands of every single meeting, make sure you're fully prepared to support the interests of your team and the business. But some strategies that I've developed in terms of that is, one, you just got to ruthlessly prioritize. There's been a ton of talk, I'm sure, at this conference around like the strategic seat that we have and all the positive influence that we can drive. But ultimately, while all these people may want to hear your perspective, it may not be like the best thing to move the needle. And so just ruthlessly prioritizing with how you're investing your time over the day has been super helpful for me. The other piece is trying to find ways to empower your teams so that they can develop a niche and grow in their skills. I mean, it strikes me that, a lot of people on this call, and certainly myself, like, are hungry to get into that seat. And so what a great way to help balance the strategic aspects of the team by like enrolling them in some of these conversations, initiatives, and projects to allow them to grow, and ultimately the team to be more effective as well.
Yeah, the involvement of the team. I mean, again, I just brought on Pat Hall, who's in the audience today. I just brought him on 2 weeks ago. So now I have the team of 3 of us working together. And what I did in the early days, and now I'm doing it with Pat, is making sure that both members of the team are participating in coming up with processes, coming up with how our Q4 motto is demo excellence. So it's up to us as a team to define what that really means and how we practically apply it. So I think creating a culture of engagement among my team is, especially at this size, is really important, because that's what helps me be able to see what I need to do from a management standpoint versus what we need to do from a technical education standpoint. Keeping awareness of both of those things comes from being close to the people who work for me.
Yeah, great comments there. I mean, honestly, a hard question. Like, how do you balance anything in life? You know, what is it, the squeakiest wheel that you're gonna put the most attention to? Is it, you know, for what I've done is, you know, my boss and I were very clear on what am I going to try and focus on this quarter? What things are we being pulled into? At our SE team, very much we're being asked to take on additional functionality of maybe other departments that aren't performing quite as well. Lately, one of those being our renewals and account management side. We're kind of thinking, how can SEs be a little bit more involved with this? Like the concept of a growth that a sales engineer is suddenly something I'm exploring. And one thing I've done the last 2 quarters that has helped me out is I look at everything I want to accomplish strategically, and then I cross out one of them that I feel is the least important, because I'm always going to sign myself up for too much. And rather than kid myself that I'm going to get all these things done and probably have 1 or 2 not really great because I did a lot of it last minute, I'm trying to just take on less. And then just like, I think both Peter and Michael brought up, like, you have other people on your team that already want to lead. And so how can you keep them a little satisfied, even when that chance might not be coming just yet? Well, bringing them to the table on the things that are their strengths and saying, I'm not going to have very much time for this thing over here. But if you want to take and run with it, like, I'll mentor and help you out any other way, but you can kind of own the success of this and have it be your thing. And so now I'm giving that person some leadership experience while also handing off the thing I wasn't going to be able to commit as much to, or maybe they might be better than me at it potentially. So I really like the bringing other people to the table. And for those of you that want to lead, like, you know, trying to get involved in those activities, because all of us managers, we have way more going on than what we can probably handle, especially in the strategic part that you can help out with. As for balancing it with the technical knowledge, I try to still pretend like, if I were to demo tomorrow, could I do it? We've had periods where a lot of people have been sick, and rather than rescheduling, I'll just jump in and do it. Am I going to be as sharp as I was before? No, but having that kind of mentality of like, well, what happens if we have another week where 2 of my US people are sick? What do I do? That kind of puts that little bit of stress in me to always have that ready and kind of keep up with the technology, the tech side, so that when I'm helping and assisting on deals, I'm not just the bumbling manager that's speaking in high level concepts, but I actually still understand the product. So some great answers there from both Michael and Peter there.
Yeah, super good insights, guys. Yeah, and also I want to make a call out. You know, we just put this in the chat. If you have any questions, we're going to get into the Q&A session. What we'll do is, we don't have any questions. We actually, you know, all of us here have a few more to go through. But if you have any curiosities, it's one thing I learned from a sales rep once who said, "What are your curiosities?" I thought that was interesting. If you have any wonderings, please put them in the Q&A. We're happy to chat through them. So the next 2 are around like growth and development and team dynamics. So we have touched on this before, on relationships changing from former peers when you've become their manager. So were there any unexpected, like, interpersonal challenges? You know, what were the relationship changes that you experienced, and any tips for us on how to navigate that?
Well, again, in the remote, I think it plays a little differently in a remote organization. But when it was just me on the entire SE team, the IC, the independent contributor, so I was able to be peered with other people who were also growing or about to grow their own teams, because we were kind of in startup mode in the United States back when I started. So the way that I did it as a remote worker was just getting on the phone more often with people who were either leading other parts of the sales organization, like the BDR team, and just maintaining that relationship there, or making connections with, making sure that I maintain connections with people on the success team, even as leadership changed there. So I guess it comes down to like a proactivity, at least in the remote mindset, a proactivity of being connected to the people that I'm evolving with. Because really, once they're in those positions, I think it's important that you evolve with the people who are going to be carrying the torch with you in various departments.
Yeah, I like that. When I would work with other people in other departments, you know, how I would portray myself is that I did want to lead. So it wasn't a surprise when the change happened. And, I mean, people pick up on these things when you're going to them on broader initiatives and thinking big term of how it's going to benefit the company more, then people can read through the lines and say like, oh, Peter's coming to me with this question that's kind of related to a deal he's on, but it's very much big picture. I kind of see where this is going. So portraying yourself that way, I would say the biggest change were the people that were the early SEs with me when I was still an individual contributor. Now I lead those people, where on one side, it's great that they knew me as an individual contributor at that time, that their openness and honesty with me hasn't taken a step back, versus the new people on my team. I feel like they very much just tell me what I want to hear a lot of times, which I can't imagine being like a CEO and trying to figure out what's going on in a company, because people probably just tell you what you want to hear, even like times 10 of what I'm getting. So I've been very, now that some of those newer people have a year under their belt here and a little more comfortable, like I'm pushing on them, like, I had to hear from such and such that, you kind of were feeling a little burnout. Like, I want you to come to me with those things. Like, I don't want to have to hear that through the grapevine. That hurts my decision making, as if I have to make educated guesses on what you're thinking and feeling. So I would say, once again, to the people in the audience, like, if your path that you want to take is to be a leader, Michael said earlier that he made it clear to the leadership team that he wanted to lead. So yes, you should be doing that. But if your managers see you as a future leader, they're also going to even be more delighted by you going that route if you do have that level of honesty and openness with them. Like, I've made some bad decisions as a leader, and the people that have been with me since the beginning are the ones that have held me accountable and like talked me out of that. And which is a big win for the team, that like, oh, Ryan's not going to be stubborn and it just set his mind to something. And so that was probably the biggest change that I noticed, was just like one team thought of me this way and the other team thought of me that way.
Awesome.
Just in terms of team dynamics, a couple things I would call out. The first is, knowing that everybody said remote's a challenge and we're fully remote too. You can't oversell the benefit of getting the team on site and in person, both like pre-sales or solutions or whatever it is for you, but also with your AEs. There's just something special about creating that in-person time that's really, really tough to build over Zoom. The other piece that was interesting for me to think through is striking the right balance between player and coach. Because it's not about offloading, the bad work. It's not about, just scaling out that way. It's about really setting the team up for success. And I think early on, a learning, a mistake that I made was kind of like overprotecting my team from some of those opportunities. I thought, hey, I'm not going to give them enough context. I might be setting them up for failure. And the reality was they had a ton of appetite and enthusiasm to dive in with both feet. So really trying to refine that balance and make sure I'm giving my team the best work has been an interesting learning.
Wow, that's insightful. We're still at 95 people here, so thank you so much for going through the whole summit with us. I really appreciate you. We've got a good amount of questions, and some of them are like multi-layered questions. We only have I think we have 10 minutes until the breakout, which is cool. Breakouts are a great opportunity. Mike asked an incredible question, and I'm going to ask you guys, how did your perspective on the company change when you went from IC to manager? Like, did you find yourself defending things that you may have criticized as an IC now that you have a new perspective?
Yeah,
I totally relate with that.
Question here is what we have here of, yeah, have you switched sides? I love this question. And the harsh truth is a little bit of yes, but it just kind of like that I talked about, like more power at your fingertips thing, that those things that drove you nuts earlier as an IC that you would maybe be at the water cooler complaining about, you can get those things changed, but you have to go about it the right way. Like Michael brought up of bringing solutions, and hey, there's sometimes I bring things to like our product and I'm like, hey, here's a problem, and I have like 5 ideas for a solution, but I'm more going to bring you the problem and let you use your expertise to solve that. There are some things though that, yeah, you are expected to go on the company side, and the biggest one would be salary negotiations and what people want for pay. That's where you really find yourself on the, I would say, to be honest, the side of the company a little bit more of kind of representing what can and can't be done. And I hate that I'm admitting that, but it is the truth. But for overall, like, everything else that has bothered me before, now I just have a little bit more of a route of changing those things, provided I do it the right way. You don't want to offend people. There is a lot of politicking that can kind of go on, that you have to meet people individually before you're at that round table where you're ultimately going to decide. Like, you basically have gone out and gotten the votes that you need before you bring these things up, and people have heard you. Like, that's an area where you're going to bomb as a manager if you bring something up without, and it's the first time everybody at the table's heard it. You have no shot of getting that thing changed. So I hope that was kind of a good answer for you, Mike. I know it's a little rambly, but to answer your question is like, yeah, you honestly do change your stance a little bit, but you are more empowered to change those things that have bothered you for a long time traditionally.
I mean, it changed more for me when I came to experience.com, because I knew going into experience.com that I was on the management track, on leadership track. But contrasting with how I behaved and thought as an independent contributor previously, I think the biggest shift is just going into it and going into the company already and thinking from a strategic level of, like, you're here for the organization's mission, vision, and values. Like, you're here. If you don't really believe in that, or if you don't really see that you can make a pathway, then maybe it's not the right place for you. But when you do latch on to the mission, I think that makes it easier to be a strategic thinker. It makes it easier to be a manager and to get behind the company. I mean, you have to get behind it, and that does mean sometimes going along with decisions that maybe you didn't agree with, but that are right for the company, or that the company decided. But I think the mindset shift happened for me when I came into the role, came into the company, and it was really just thinking, what does it mean to think about the health of the organization, and think of it in those terms.
Yeah, Mike, I really like what you said at the end there in terms of, you got to come across as agreeing. The last thing you want to do is put your team at odds with HR, with other leadership, with sales, right? Like, that can't happen. And there has to be a certain level of deference given to, even if like it wasn't the decision that you found yourself on that side of, even if like maybe you think it's going to cause some like short-term frustration for your team, you have to maintain that line of consistency so that you don't set up these sort of artificial skirmishes within your team. And the other piece, I saw somebody was commenting about Salesforce, and it just really resonated with me because I'm in that exact same boat. I, as a player coach, am now dreading putting it in, and also following up so persistently with my team to put in those notes. And hey, I think it's tough, and you could say my perspective has changed, but to kind of spin the question, I think it's cool because I've had the experience of hating putting it in. I've had the experience of having to fall for people to do a task they don't like. But now in my seat, I have the opportunity to influence other teams and processes to design an experience that's going to be least encumbering to them. And I can also share with them like the why behind we need the data like that, and how that's going to ultimately make their deals impactful, maybe even save them time down the road that they weren't anticipating.
Yeah, couldn't agree more on that. When I saw that point from Dan on Salesforce, like any activity tracking or data entry or anything as an IC is just a blocker to your next meeting. If you get into management and you're like, that's why we're here. If you don't do that, it doesn't exist. Like, and you do definitely have to get on the company's you have to look for the health of the organization, and those notes and that opportunity are going to be important for years. And it only takes XYZ amount of time. But as an SE, I always like, you try to put your notes in, you're trying to prepare for the next demo, you put half the notes you should have in there. You kind of get away with the few things you can get away with. Okay, so switching gears a little bit. Thank you so much for all the comments and questions. Another question that came in is around, and I've seen this a lot, which is like, we're basically an organization that doesn't have a rec open for management. Like in this individual question, it was, basically they feel like they're at the end of their rope with the org, like they're in a senior role, there's not a principal role, there's not a management role open for them. They don't want to restart their career at a different company. Do you have any tips and tricks on how as an individual contributor, do you go to HR and business management and say, I need you to create a position for me?
I mean, I report directly to the SVP of sales, and eventually, yeah, I do have aspirations to bring more of solutions engineering to the broader table, but it's very much part of sales, obviously, and working under our amazing SVP of sales is great. I think just being frank with whoever at that level at the C-suite goes to bat for you is where you have to start, because getting creative about titles is something I think that can be done. And then kind of deciding, and I did this for us, for my team, to say, what are the levels? What does each level mean? What goes into these titles? Kind of figure out for yourself, what are you really trying to get out of that next level, so that you can clearly articulate to the C-suite why you would need a different title or what you want that shift to be. I mean, just think being very clear on the ask is going to help define how you actually get it.
Yeah, I'd echo that. And just what's going to be the value to the business of you doing this? So make sure you understand why you want to be a leader. That's the number one thing we ask people from other teams that want to be SEs is, well, why? Same thing goes with, well, why do you want to be a manager? So be able to answer that. And then what is going to be the value to the business of doing it? Because once again, we're in the position we're in to make our team better, not just put together some reports on what it is we're doing based on Salesforce notes. So being very clear to that, and yeah, go to the C-suite. I love our HR people team. They do a great job, but they're not usually going to make a decision on carving a rollout for somebody unless it's coming from the top down to them. So they represent the company and align the company legally for all those things, and they're not going to make the decision on making you a manager or carving a rollout unless it's coming from who's paying them.
All right, Chris, slap my wrist if this is like the non-political answer, but I think one thing I've learned in being a manager is you can really get creative with titles. You can get creative with recognition, with compensation, with a lot of different vectors for growth, if you will. But sometimes it just isn't in the cards. Like enough territory to carve up into fiefdoms, and in the foreseeable future, because things move fast as an SE in the next 1 to 2 years, that may not exist. And so if you're finding yourself in that situation, it can absolutely be appropriate for you as a manager to say, hey, like there isn't a role for you, but I do think like you're ready for that next role, and I would love to help support you to grow into that maybe somewhere else, because that might be ultimately what's in the best interest for the individual if the business needs and the talents of the individual just don't match up.
Couldn't agree with you more. I've done that in my career, has helped people find better roles that are better suited for them, and I think that's actually good for the business and good for them. So good discussion, everybody. Thank you so much.